credentials, at the same time, the character. And so Paul was forced to respond for the health of the gospel there and throughout that region. Before Troy, because of the air cost or Galatians, and in someone now for air can fund. No enema for a stroke, that. In fact, name before a threat, impassioned self-defense. Impassioned self-defense of a wounded spirit. Impassioned self-defense of a wounded spirit. And he do who Paul said, Galati ngomano or Troy abra na enam ensemwa ya kafa no kwadu a ya bono as a character assassination, but omuhu ni su say nya correct ni dibre no ni position ekura no as an apostle of God no omuhu ni say enye no, but onye a true apostle. Say no Paul so Troy so bia why you wounded na or the defended mistake. The defended mistake. Now a bit say in the fortress or the quail no at the pool tears on one issue any na who he him and or the efra ink or the betron or the rosa galat. And Yomo said it contains far more pathos than any other letter. Now, you can't pathos now. You can't say BB contain far more pathos. Pathos is about a quality in something, such as a story or situation that evokes a feeling of pity or sympathy or sadness in the audience. And the emotional appeal used here. And in before any be said, Paul, a da na di. I'm going to say not all true Galati woman, no, I read whom more. Now, read what some will she good crapanos. Now, o defend Yamia sem in such a way that would be unto me incorrupt the genuine doctrine, now the true doctrine now, o defend it at that time. So I see this book as an apologetic, where Paul stood on the ground to defend faith, grace, and spirit versus flesh. And so in this book, we see Paul defending faith versus work, grace versus law, spirit versus flesh. And then he went further. He also defended truth versus error, church versus state, Christianity versus paganism, Christ versus pseudo-Christ. And so these are the things Paul tackled. Tackle these things to defend them. Now, over the book of Galatians, now we are a critical study of the emotional display in the life of the apostle. I think I can see a name the Ekesipa do she good crackers or Galatians and women. Now, very interesting. Said the last time you can say Roman one woman instruct us to be grounded in doctrine. Last week Corinthians and so you see and you said it guided us about the things we do. So it was a guide in our practice where people tend to like others and then ignore the work of others, where division was rampant in the church. And so Galatians was also a letter written to be guarded against error. Nti ofa Galati ngoma na unse otrofo no maya hunu ye eye papa ye mfonso ye nokre ye nya nokre that nti tackle issue no way versus way, way versus way, way versus way, way versus way will be a man just just to defend his cause. He is a true apostle and he can rightly divide the word of truth. And you know, for the book of Galatians, a woman, a mayenya a sound doctrine, not a godly doctrine. Yɛbɛhwɛ nneɛma a ɔno atu bi hwɛ deɛ ɔsoro ɛwɔ ɛde ɛman. Now yɛhwɛ grounds a na Paul egyina de twerɛ Galati nwoma no a yɛbɛka sɛ it was a battle cry of the Reformation, a battle cry of the Reformation, because it teaches liberation through the gospel. Nkurɔfoɔ pii hu no sɛ asɛmpa no ba a ɛsɛ sɛ ɔyɛ biribi ka. At least asɛmpa no nko ara nyɛ pɛ. I was listening to a preacher who said, sɛ wonya gyidie no a na yɛgye wo nso wie sei pa a nneɛma bi wɔ hɔ a wɔsɛ woyɛ nsa na wogyeɛ no a yɛagye wo na wie pɛyɛ. Sɛ Yesu Kristo gyeɛ na ɔgyeɛ no, both the past, the present and the future no ɛnya nwie pɛyɛ. Sɛ ɔyɛ nneɛma bi wie ansa na wogyeɛ na wie pɛyɛ paa. If you talk about that, then Yesu Kristo n'adwuma no wanwie, it is finished no. Na kyerɛ sɛ ɔwɔ sɛ ɔkɔ n'akyi na ɔkɔka no foforɔ. Despite the fact that wonya nkwagyeɛ na Awurade hwehwɛ nnwuma pa na ɔnkyerɛ sɛ wanwie nkwagyeɛ no wɔwie. But binom susu sɛ nneɛma bi wɔ hɔ a wɔsɛ ɔyɛ ansa na nkwagyeɛ no awie pɛyɛ paa. Kyerɛ sɛ wantumi anyɛ deɛ anha wo. Ɛno na ɛmaa Paul nso gyinaeɛ. So it was the breeding ground for Paul to deal with faith versus works, grace versus law, spirit versus flesh, truth versus error, church versus state, and then Christianity versus paganism. And last but not last, he also dealt with the Christ versus pseudo Christ. Now, yɛbɛhwɛ saa nneɛma wei kakra na yɛahwɛ one or two things bi. Now you zoom into the scriptures just to see whether we can ascertain one or two things concerning the background of Galatians. And you know, the first couple of chapters, it shows the authenticity of the gospel, its origin and nature. Then the superiority of the gospel, the new relation it affects, and the privilege it releases. And then also the true liberty we have in Christ. Then we also come to love and service, and then which replace the law and bondage. And the last is the spirit ends the bondage of the flesh. Galatians reveals a series of contrasts and surprises. And you know, this is the first couple of chapters now. Niema Edanedi. First couple of chapters now. You be who say Paul Emiya Hunu Asempano. Ye tumwa ye and from so be a niho a genuine, a authentic. And she also my the origin and nature of the gospel. The origin and the nature of the gospel. To the extent that he warned us that apart from the gospel that they have preached, there will be any other gospel bar we should reject. Even if the person is that being is an angel or whatsoever. And you know, Paul San Somayehun, the superiority of the gospel, Sempano, to me, a womb, and the new relation it affects. A young Fafo Fra Sempano, a danady, and I say unity, and then the privileges, Pasodia, Sempano de Ba, and Chichiri, and my young Kwa, and share your so. I mean, who you left from your right. And ma emrawesi bi a mekisen ye kom or ekasa marine. And then the true liberty we have in Christ. Even Christ you will Christ mu say yankwa or onimtuni bi say awe oba ye naso eni nkwaso mu bi. Radia we aye abusua fofo. Enti saa nneoma ni mu na Paul enam so de ekasa. Enti ebe hu ne say Galatians for woman a different day nneɛma ahodoɔ pii na ɔpɛ sɛ asafo no hunu ne mfonini a na ɛnyɛ papa ɛtwa ɛfa ɔno Paul ne te dan hyiase no na ɛgyina so different day yɛ ɛwɔ Agyaw te sɛ dɛ na mɛka no medifo pii ama yɛahunu sɛ owura no de ne nisuo ne yaw kyerɛ different day nipa koro a ɔyɛ different day gyidie ne nnwuma ɔdɔm ne mmara nti no yɛhwɛ sɛdeɛ Paul kasa fa faith versus work no a you don't earn your salvation, it's a gift of God. If you have saving faith, it will be demonstrated through work. Nti ɛyɛ gift but when you have that saving faith no deɛ ɛne nnwuma ɛbɛda bi wɔ nnwuma mu but ɔma asɔre ne te aseɛ sɛ and then grace. And then he also talked about grace versus law. Grace versus law. He said that grace has a tendency to become living with legalism. And so anytime grace is at work, there is a tendency that that grace will become living with legalism. Living with legalism. And then Paul cancer. You hear the word legalism. In fact, a very interesting word. And so if Paul says faith or grace has the tendency to become living with legalism, that is as I'm guessing about. Now the word legalism, no, it means strict, literal, or excessive conformity to the law. When emrawese and I say a moral code, strict, literal, or excessive conformity to the law. Because grace has that tendency to become living with the legalism. And you know, wɔdom ase ne ani ama yɛ ho so ne ante wɔdom ase ne nhunu sɛ de wɔdom si yɛ adwuma. Paul say that same grace has a tendency to become living with legalism. That's strict, literal, or excessive conformity to the law. And you how Paul dealt with legalism in the book of Galatians. And then he also talked about spirit versus flesh. Spirit versus flesh. And here, Paul said we are to walk by our own choices and emotions. Or do you walk by faith? It's a question Paul imposed on us. Do you walk by your own choices and emotions? Or do you walk by faith and the Spirit of God? So it's a moment by moment daily challenge. So Paul was dealing with spirit versus flesh in such a way that he gave us a question, a rhetorical question, as to how we can walk in the faith. And he said that do we walk by our own choices and emotions, or do we walk by faith in the Spirit of God? And he made an emphatic statement that we are to walk in the Spirit, meaning when grace is at work and then Spirit is activated, then we have to yield to the Spirit of God by walking in the Spirit, not by our own choices and emotions. And then the next thing he talked about was the truth versus error. Truth versus error. And how Paul was emphasizing that we are to guard our doctrine, guard our doctrine from error. Why? Because the Kama Shastra said some other people were insinuating that Paul was a coward and he had sown doubt about his credentials. So Paul was forced to respond for the health of the gospel there and throughout the region. So if Paul went ahead to talk about the truth versus error, and Paul wanted us to guard, he wanted them to guard their doctrine from error. And the error there was about the gospel. The gospel. And Paul is the exercise and defending, and not know share to the sense that the book of and a fine plan. I be with me. The big crowd would do one because no one needs said it was yet any aba would be any asempa the a guassarin would be a dear. Then so no. My one whole time, my apostle to me that the adjoining time to so Paul wrote to defend that true doctrine that he laid in the church. He also talked about the church versus state. Here he said we are watching that unravel in our own culture. We are watching that unravel in our own culture. And as for no any of mine, Niema a cost, Nioma SSC, Yetimi in na ebetumi ase asɔre ne nyinaa pɔ kasaka sɛ yɛbie nneɛma ahodoɔ a ɛfi amanneɛ ne amammerɛ so na ɛtumi sesa wɔ nipa ne dɔkta Paul ɛyɛ saa adeɛ no so adwuma. He also talked about Christ versus paganism. For example, like our government schools are forcing paganism on our kids. Biblical Christianity has become increasingly politically incorrect. And so Paul time paganism, whereby the Christian will be forced to embrace pagan ideologies, pagan rituals. So Paul was saying that Nyoma MAN said Christ for incorrect. And then the last one was Christ versus pseudo Christ. And no, may who said the dead or Christo represented Christo 12. In Galatians, and as in the book of Galatians, it is pointed out that Abraham was saved 430 years before the law. If you share Galatians 4:9, he says Abraham was 430 years before the law. Paul argued that the promises of God preceded the law and cannot be announced. So Ishmael and Isaac in the Old Testament were modeled here as different with different principles, the flesh and the spirit. So Paul uses two people, Ishmael, the Lord has heard, and then Isaac, laughter, and he modeled them into two characters. The Ishmael type of people are the people after the flesh, And then the Isaac type of people are the people in the spirit. And so that is what Paul was given, two different principles in the Old Testament. He made us understand that Ishmael was born in unbelief. The son of the bondwoman would not heir. Paul declared Isaac was a promise in response to faith. The ultimate triumph in God was the offering of Isaac, just as a final challenge of faith in our response to the offering of Jesus Christ. Paul so now I say we see two characters. Mmɔfra mmienu a wɔn nyinaa yɛwɔ wɔn ma aba. Baako a ɛyɛ Ishmael, Awurade ate. Baako a ɛyɛ Isaac, ɔsereɛ. Ɛna wɔma wɔn ɛberɛ a yɛde wo wɔn ne wɔn abrabɔ nhyehyɛeɛ ne anammɔntuo ne wɔn su no, wɔde twa mfonini kyerɛɛ sɛ Ishmael a ɔyɛ Awurade ate, he was a symbol or a symbolic deed here, not a portrait, a man walking in the flesh. And then over Isaac and so so you shouldn't say, oh yeah, about Fabia, no, a portray a man in the flesh, in the spirit. And so if Ishmael was walking in the flesh, Isaac was walking in the spirit. And so na ye GD edi nhwɛsoɔ bi to yɛafɔrebɔ kɛseɛ a ɛne Kristo Yesu deɛ ɔyɛɛ wɔ asɛnnua no so. Nti binom hunu sɛ asɛnnua no so nneɛma no yɛ nkwasasɛm because they are walking in the flesh. Others see it as beneficial because they are walking in the spirit. Nti these character traits no a ɛyɛ adwuma wɔ Ishmael and Isaac no ɛbɛyɛ two categories of people we are seeing to be falling in one way or the other. If people are following the trail of Ishmael, then and if others are also following the trail of Isaac, then they will see it will to me a junk. So this is what Paul was saying. He also dealt with the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, self-control. First three are of the heart. The next three relate to your neighbor. And you know the fruit of the Spirit now. Love, joy, and peace. The state of your heart. The next three, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, and also the ye fit and for and so a da a d ye fit and for. And then the last three also relate to God. That is faith, meekness, and self-control. So, how is your love life? The secret of your love life should be the utter monopoly of your heart by the Holy Spirit. And faith, meekness, self-control. To be our state, the state of our heart. Paul, forbearance. Who said there are forbearance in the book of Galatians. Fruit bearing, which is the ninth fruit of the Spirit. Burden bearing, which is bearing one another's burden. And then seed bearing, which is whatsoever a man sows, that shall he reap. And then the fourth burden is the brand bearing. The brand bearing is I bear the mark of the Lord Jesus Christ. So in the book of Galatians, we have four bearings. First one is the fruit bearing, which is the fruit of the Spirit. And then the burden bearing, which is bearing one another's burden. And then seed bearing, which is whatsoever a man sows, that shall he reap. And then the last one is the brand bearing. And that brand bearing talks about us bearing the mark of the Lord Jesus. Adding here, because in those days, slaves had a brand that was a mark of ownership. Soldiers had a brand that was a mark of allegiance to the leaders. Criminals had a brand, one of the indictments. Those that were abhorred, as the lepers, had a mark of reproach. Devotees had marks of consecration. And so Paul's body had all five of them. It's amazing. And you hear brand ahodoɔ Paul maa yɛhuiɛ na bearings no, four bearings na Paul ɛmi etwa mfoni mi ehu sɛ saa abere nim no nkoa na ɔmo wɔ brand bi a ɛda a ɔmo adi na ɔmo hunu sɛ ɔmo yɛ nkoa. Saa brand no yɛfrɛ no a mark of ownership. Na asogyafoɔ nso wɔ brand bi a ɛyi wɔn adi ɛma ɔmo pledge allegiance sɛ wɔn yɛ asraafoɔ. And a mark of allegiance to the leader. And then criminals, the money for some more brand, one of indictment. And then one more so the abhorred, the lepers. They had a mark of reproach, a mark of reproach. And then devotees also had a mark of consecration. So five brand yi a yɛabobɔ so yi nyinaa na mark yi nyinaa Paul na ɔwɔ ne nyinaa bi. He was once a soldier, a slave, a criminal, a leper, in a sense that he went through reproach. Nyɛ sɛ na ɔyɛ akoa, yɛka no sɛ kwata anaasɛ, but he went through reproach. And so he called that one a mark of reproach. And he also had a mark of consecration because he was a devotee. He had devoted himself to Christ Jesus. So Paul says in the book of Galatians that he had all these five marks. So the epistle to the Galatians can be summarized by this admonition. Are you so foolish? You can kind the book of Galatians. The tough and bone minister will be so say, are you so foolish? I didn't hear, because if you begin your journey in the spirit, you don't make a sharp turn by journeying in the flesh and then ignoring the spirit that gives us life. And the Paul ma yehunu Galatifoɔ a wɔhyɛ aseɛ wɔ honhom. Now there was a sharp twist. Afei deɛ ɔmo abɛyɛ honam mu to the extent that they couldn't even defend what they believed. They were bewitched. So we can summarize that with a question: are you so foolish? Paul said, foolish Galatians. Why? Because they decided to believe in a lie. Believe in the things of the flesh and the things of the spirit. So this is what the background of Galatians is. Now, obi wɔ question a ɔbɛtumi bisa ansa na ahɛ sɛ ɛbɛtumi ayɛ one adeɛ pɛ na ɛsɔfani aba na yɛama ɔno apɛtiko. This is the book of Galatians. The book of Galatians. Or question bi a ɔbɛtumi abisa. I catch that as a Titus delivered a disturbing report that the doctors were attacking false colors. And no Hello. Any question be hello? Any question be answer between us to nine now? How will they take it our next move? Hello. But no big. Okay. Na ɛyɛ me ha yi ana. Hello. Okay. I was talking about a strict rule, a strict conformity to the law. Uh, no nana make us a legalism, a strict conformity to the law. Meaning of legality. So we need to adhere to a moral or rather than a personal religious faith. And Paul who said, Galatians 1, but the one to Mravis sometimes so instead saying Kobema Odum Nakasama on na Rade Ejuma Homa ye Ejuma no. Omo de omo ho to Mravis na ɛyɛ excess. It will be a strict, literal, or excessive conformity to the law. Next, at the end, waya ma bros, bros. The sense that also the sense that also had been summarized into mra. Why you say you're unqualified? Why you say you're unqualified? Why you say you're unqualified? The sense that you can't get them for a plan or the hint because never go what you nti yɛpɛke book no a yɛbɛhu practices ahodoɔ a na Paul ɛreka ho asɛm a ɛyɛ about legalism na yɛnya nwura book no nti no I believe sɛ sɛ yɛbɛwura mu no yɛbɛpekepeke one of them na yɛakasa. I hope so. You hello. Is this a question? No? I hope so. You okay? Because you got chapter 2 you be who okay chapter 2 you be who reference. What's it? Okay, and me de kakra ka ho ansa na yɛwura book in chapter 2 ne bɛhu sɛ reference bi a Paul make yɛ na ɛwɔ ne letter ni mu ɛde condemn legalism no sɛ ɛyɛ Peter mpo koraa no ɔtwi n'anim because na wɔne amanamanmufoɔ no wɔn ntɛm no ɛfa didie ho no na ɛnwie pɛyɛ because na osuro sɛ wɔn a belong to the circumcision group no wanhwɛ a ɔde ne ho kɔtwitwi amanamanmufoɔ no a yɛntwa wɔn twetia no a wanhwɛ a na ɔmabua no. So Paul was talking about that Jewish laws no a wɔde akyekyere wɔn ho ntan a no nti ɛma wɔntumi flow with the Gentiles. We will see other references that Paul make or Galatians 1 na aka ho. But for now, I want us to stick to the background. Now, we have a general view about why Paul wrote the book of Galatians. The sentence said, Tito, na de krata report from Paul, na a very disturbing report about detractors nkurɔfoɔ bi a attack Paul ne su ne ne credentials. Nti no, ɛno na Paul responded. So he was forced to respond for the good health of the gospel. Ɛsɛ sɛ afei asɛmpa no ɛgyina bea bi ma ɔhu sɛ asɛmpa no deɛ gyina ne nan so tintim ketewa bi anim. Na wɔn a wɔyɛ adwuma wɔ Nyame n'ase ne wɔn a Nyame afrɛ wɔn no su bi na ɛyɛ ama akɔyɛ sɛ nanso bi wɔ asɛmpa. So Paul had to defend it. So I call this book an apologetic. Na ɛyɛ a guide. Sɛ yɛde guide yɛ doctrine. Sɛ wohwɛ na sɛdeɛ wo sound teachings no sɛ ɛyɛ atoma a, then go back to Galatians and then correct some of the things. We use the book of Galatians. I bet make me sɛdeɛ wobɛsi akyerɛkyerɛ didie ho, ɔnom ho, gyidie ho, nnwuma ho, ɔdɔm, mmara, honhom ne honam ne abasoɔ, akono ne ɔman no, nofrɛ ne kɔ, kristosom ne yɛasesɛm ne yɛkeka ho nyinaa. Wofa a ɛbɛbie w'ani paa because Paul took his time to deal with those issues. Another question. Do another question. Okay, nti sɛ biribi ani hɔ deɛ a yɛmfa nhyɛ yɛtirim sɛ report a Paul ansaeɛ no was solely about people who were trying to pervert the gospel. And Paul had to stand in and then deal with the issues they brought on board. Now, Nyame de yɛn kwakyɛ na yɛn mu na yɛte ase. Yɛbɛfa chapter by chapter, and then we will talk about nneɛma a Paul ɛtoo ne bo ase na n'ahohiahia ne n'awerɛhoɔ mu ne ne nimdeɛ kɛseɛ wɔ Nyame mu ɔde twerɛe defended doctrine a na wa-establish wɔ the church in Galatia. Na afei yɛahwɛ deɛ na ɛyɛ mfonsoɔ, deɛ ɛyɛ papa, deɛ Paul pɛɛ sɛ ohunu ɔdɔm fa, ohunu kristosom fa, ohunu Kristo ne su ankasa fa, ne abasoɔ ahodoɔ ne nea ɛkeka ho no nyinaa. We will pick them. Maybe we will pick 2 of them. Deɛ aka no, wode background no to ho a, bɛtumi aka. So Nyame de yɛn kwakyɛ, we will link the background to the passage or the pericope we will accept to study, and we will choose to study. Na yɛahwɛ nneɛma a ɛwɔ mu a Paul defended.